Welcome to Rethink Retirement. Our webinar today is here to help you design the kind of life you'd like to live after work, or maybe as another form of work. Who knows? But I'm watching our attendees come in, and I can't thank you enough. So we're going to give us a few minutes to have everyone come along. It looks great to me. I've launched these webinars. I'll give you a little context. As part of the Rethink Retirement programs that we've developed after writing our book that came out this past March. Little context for why the book. My husband sold his business in 2011 and announced, I'm not retiring. And so I laughed and I said, so what are you going to do? He said, I'm joining your business. I can see the press release now. Successful entrepreneur has decided to join his wife's business. Now, this is so much fun. I'm going to turn off my cell phone. Forgive me for a moment. There we go. And I said, let's see what this thing retirement is all about. And I got hired in 2023 to actually go and study what life was like in very expensive independent living communities out in Oregon. They wanted to know why their scores on quality weren't very good. And I began to understand what people who had retired were living through and the kind of cultures that they were trying to create. And then I started to do research. And here's our webinar today to begin to share with you some of the insights and findings that we found. I'm Andy Simon. I'm a corporate anthropologist. I specialize in helping people and their organizations to change. Today, I have with me Karen Filler, who is absolutely a wonderful, wonderful person for us to share her thoughts and her experiences with about rethinking retirement. Karen, thanks for joining me today. I'm so glad you're here. Now, Karen was brought to me by Lori Hirsch-Schultz, who is a transitional coach. And Lori and I put on workshops occasionally. And this is really fun because we like to share the stories. And for those of you who are attending, and perhaps those who aren't and will listen later, the stories help you begin to think about yourself. These are role models. Remember, we're copycats. And now I wanted to tell you about Karen Filler's own experiences so she can tell you about her story. Karen Filler has spent more than 3 decades helping people prepare for retirement, not just financially, but thoughtfully. As a chartered retirement planning counselor and a senior wealth management advisor, she's guided hundreds of individuals and families through one of life's biggest transitions. Karen believes retirement isn't simply about leaving work. It's about creating a life with purpose, flexibility, and financial confidence. Now, she will tell you, as I've learned, that many people work really hard to retire and then don't spend anything afterwards to enjoy it. Her practical wisdom and deep understanding of the emotional side of retirement makes her an ideal partner in today's conversation about rethinking what's possible in our next chapter. Karen, this is a wonderful opportunity for you to share what you shared with us about your own journey. And for all of you who are joining now, and we're just about a full house, we will have time at the end for your questions, and I'll open up chat so that you can ask them. Now, I can only tell you that the questions often are very personal, so I'm trying to keep it at the end so that we don't really disrupt the journey that we're on today, because Karen has a story that's well worth sharing. Karen, how are you today? And talk to us about your own journey to where you are now, because it's such fun.
Thank you very much, Andy. So I do want to talk about my journey, but before I do that, I just want to give you some background so you understand who I am, which might be helpful in the context of the journey. So I am the mother of 2 adult daughters who are actually now mothers themselves of very young sons. I am the daughter of 2 parents who are 94 and 95, both unfortunately suffering from dementia and are divorced. So we're in 2 separate situations, which I can talk, maybe I'll get into later. Um, as Andy said, I've spent more than 3 decades in the financial service world. The large part of that prior to COVID, commuting from my home in Westchester, leaving the house at 7 in the morning and getting home around 7 at night. I am have also through my those 3 decades, I am divorced, so went through a divorce after 19 years of marriage. Um, and luckily, everybody is happy and friends, so I'm lucky, but still had to navigate that. Um, and so that's sort of some of my background. I also so here's really what happened. So having worked for two very large corporations and again commuting into Manhattan, um, I finally got to the point where I said, I've worked really hard and as a financial advisor helping people get to retirement, I knew that I'd have to be financially secure myself before I could explore any change in my corporate work life to change that. And so roundabout in, I'd say 2021, I actually went to the company that I was working for and said, I've been an advisor here for, it had been by that point, maybe 15, 16 years. Um, Perhaps for me as a senior advisor and other senior advisors at this company, is there an exit strategy? Can we create something here that would allow an advisor to um, leave with sort of a package, I guess you'd call it. It had never been done before, but let's talk. And we did and connected with HR, and I was on a committee. And to make a long story short, it really didn't launch, and it didn't happen. Um, it wasn't, it didn't come to fruition. Let's leave it at that. So then, I said, all right, I understand where their head is at. Now I got an answer. I can explore other things. And um, I decided that I couldn't do this myself. I just was struggling with what's next. What am I going to do? Do I want to keep doing what I'm doing? Do I want to do something different? Do I want to do nothing? And I decided to hire a coach, as Andy mentioned. Um, and I can't express how much that really helps. I mean, I just felt I couldn't do it myself. And it's like coaching therapy to decide what do I want my life to look at. And also, it's not just about the work part or the non-work. It's very much, for me anyway, having been this, worker bee, commuting into the city, working very hard, I didn't have time to develop relationships in the suburbs where I live. So that was a concern of mine. How am I going to not be in this communal setting of the corporate world where I had, really good relationships with my colleagues and really enjoyed them and I knew I was going to miss that and that, that was a hard thing to leave. How am I going to create that? uh, if I'm no longer there. So um, that was part of the discussions with my coach, Lori, um, to think about those things. And I would very much emphasize if you can pre-plan and think about those things well in advance, how you're going to work out this life-changing event. So actually, interestingly, when COVID started, a little bit after COVID started, I live in a condominium and the board was kind of after me on and off to become part of the board at my condominium complex. And finally, when I was home during COVID, I had more time. I wasn't commuting and I finally agreed and said yes. I then became part of the welcome committee and started meeting people where I live, which I'd never done before. And I now have a couple of good friends new friends, which is not so easy to do later in your life.
Mhm.
So that was really good. But anyway, in working with Lori, we explored different avenues, and I came to the conclusion, and this is an interesting point. I have suffered from migraines and have a neurologist, and even had discussions with my neurologist to say, should I stop? Should I not work anymore? And she was like, nope, you should keep going. It keeps the mind going. Having two parents with dementia, that's very concerning for me. So I made the decision. I love what I do and I don't want to stop. And so then I had to explore what is it that I'm going to do. And I was lucky enough to have former colleagues from my 18-year term with the organization I worked for who had already left and created what is called a registered investment advisory firm. And there are thousands of those out there. But it's basically a group of independent advisors, but we work together and share all things relating to the back office compliance, technology, most importantly, our chief investment officer, who ironically at Legacy Edge, which is where I am, and you can see on the screen, the chief investment officer and I worked together 20 years ago at JP Morgan. So it was a very comfortable place for me to decide to move to, um, where I can, we're all fiduciaries. We can have the amount of clients we want and not be dictated as to, the load of work that had been dictated to us. And so it was an easy transition to keep doing what I'm doing, helping people um, get to retirement. I also do work a lot with people on their incapacity and legacy plan, having had the experience again of working with, not working with, but taking care of my parents. I often call myself their back office because I get all the mail. I deal with, all the insurances, making phone calls. I guess I'm their chief investment officer and their chief operating officer. And luckily, I would call my sister, who lived out in Colorado, the chief HR officer, because she handles the aides. We make it work and it's a process. And, so I've experienced a lot in helping people that unfortunately have to become the caregivers of their parents, involving, all relating to incapacity planning and making sure people are set up appropriately. Um, so I made the move about a year. It's been a little bit over a year, just slightly over a year. And it is life-changing because having worked for, in the corporate world for about 35 years to become quote unquote self-employed, it's been amazing because I have more free time to dictate, what I want to do on a daily basis. I joined another board, my local JCC, and I've been with them a year and just became an officer there. And the place is an amazing community center that I very much advocate for and feel passionate about making sure that it thrives. So now I'm serving on two boards, not-for-profit boards, running my business, taking care of my parents, seeing my family, playing pickleball. And so here I am.
But Karen, I thought was a wonderful person to describe how you can decide and design the next stage in your life by intention, as opposed to by chance. On many of the workshops I've been holding, some people find themselves retired because they've lost their job. At a prior webinar I did, the woman had in fact lost her job and had to reinvent herself, not on her time, but on someone else's. Karen saw something coming, and I want to sort of emphasize for those of you who are listening that you can see something coming. The question is, how intentional are you going to be to understand that I bet none of you have practiced retirement? I've not met anyone except one friend who actually took a year off from work to see what it was like. But most of the time, you hit retirement, no experience, no understanding. And really, what I've learned in the research we've done and in writing the book and the workshops is that there are four pillars that you need to consider, maybe five, but four that are real important. And I'll use Karen to begin to emphasize it. The first one is, who am I without my business card? And you're smiling, but the real challenge for people, I had a workshop and one of the gentlemen was 2 days into retirement. And I said, and how do you identify yourself? I'm recently retired. I said, okay, that'll work for a little while. How long are you going to be recently? And will retirement be your identity when your business card no longer works? The second thing is I find people have a hard time getting up in the morning with nothing on their calendar. One person I interviewed said it so well. First time in my life, I have nothing on my calendar. I'm free. A little while later, I don't know what to do. And the third time later, I'm really miserable. So that the kind of work that Karen had structured her day really well. She got on the train in the morning. She knew where to go in the office. She came home at night. Everything was pretty organized. We love, as humans, structure. We think the freedom is what we've been waiting for. Try it and then see how well you can do with it. And the third thing is, what's my purpose? Why do I matter? And Karen had spent 38 years helping people with their financial planning and done it really well. Now, why do I matter next? And the last one, which I want to emphasize, is who are my friends? She had said something to me early in our conversation. I thought I had all these friends in the office, only to discover I was now retired. They weren't my friends. I had to begin to build a new network, which I hadn't done because I was a commuter into the city. You have no idea how many folks said to me, I called the folks in the office who I knew so well. Nobody had any time for me. One woman said to me that I met down at a New Jersey event, I used to get on the train every day, travel into the city, and I had a community. Then I retired. I don't get on the train. I have no friends. And then one woman who was a tremendous success as a translator from Japanese to English and other languages came back to Chicago and found she had no friends and didn't know how to do it. So I want you to listen to Karen and listen to your own four pillars. Now I want to flip it back to Karen. What are some of the things you've discovered? Could be around the four. My fifth one is time. You now have lots of time. Don't waste it. How are we going to use it? But some of the things that you might like the audience to really emphasize in your own story, because it's so rich with how do you design the life you'd like to live in this next chapter. A little pickleball would be fun, but not all the time. And you don't want every day to be a Saturday. There's a good thing to have a Monday. Your thoughts?
Well, I what I do is, usually I get up in the morning and I have a home office and I go right to my office, and which is similar to what I did when I was working from home. And
Hmm.
even when I left, I could still work from home a couple of days. And so that's very helpful to start my day working. And then other things, come about. I might schedule, I need to run to the JCC to have a meeting or go to an event and, make sure that, and there's other, and then I have my board here, the condo, and, things happen there. But, what I would emphasize is, re- really sitting down and thinking about what you want life to be like, um, and and to talk with somebody who can help you to do that. Um, so that's really and really digging deep. When I went through the coaching, there's a process. So there's exercises that you fill out to say who you are, what you like, what you don't like. One of the things people. It's funny you mentioned about have you ever, tell me about re you didn't know anybody who retired and then, went back to work, right? And jokingly, sometimes I would say to my clients, because
Hmm.
people, if you've not been in retirement ever and your relationship to money, you haven't lived through that. And sometimes people would be a little flippant and be like, it'll be okay. I know what I'm doing. And I jokingly would say, tell me about the last time you retired. Because one of the things is, how are you going to receive income? And I have to say, because of, maybe it's my neuroses about money, um, and how I was raised, which, to be frugal. Um, parents from the Depression era, grandparents from the Depression era, um, thinking about myself not working anymore and not having any money
Hmm.
coming in was something that was not palatable to me.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of the folks who are in the book, there are 30 stories in the book, but some of them sold their company and then didn't have any income coming in, but were still managing money as if they did.
Mm.
And they had that aha moment where the breadwinner wasn't making money anymore, and they weren't quite sure how to spend the money they had put aside, and terrified they would run out of it. And I have a hunch that's something, a wisdom that you've discovered as you work with people, because they worked all this time, successfully sold their business, and now how do I live? Was completely unclear to them. And their story in the book was really interesting because they said, this isn't so easy. I'm walking around the house wondering whether I can buy this or not buy this, do
Yeah.
this, go on. I'm planning on trips. Do I plan them? Frightening unknown thoughts.
Well, that's why it's really good to have a financial advisor. And that financial advisor should give you confidence by doing a financial plan and really testing the situation to know that you will be okay to spend X amount. But again, people have very interesting relationships with money.
Yes.
I've had people sit in my office and say, I got to get to this amount before I can retire, or, and be so frugal when they have millions and millions of dollars, because it's very hard to change your relationship with money,
Yeah.
and those that are frugal tend to
Stay
remain
frugal.
that way.
Yes.
Unfortunately, those that spend too much, it's very hard to pull back.
Hmm.
Um, I can tell you the story of my father, which is probably how I got into this business. He was not in this business at all. He actually was a New York City Board of Ed school teacher. And his lifelong passion, because he was a Eagle Scout, Boy Scout, Eagle Scout, was to own a children's sleepaway camp, which he did accomplish at the young age of like 30 and owned for about 25 years. But he always was like always liked a little gambling. And so he liked the market because the market can sometimes be called legalized gambling. Um, and so he was an early investor. He was actually an early person to have a computer, which, and he was a health and phys ed teacher. He wasn't, that you wouldn't think that this man would, be into investing, but he was, and very good and smart with money. And for some reason, I just, I attached to that and thought retirement planning would be great. And also, he retired at age 55 as a New York City Board of Ed school teacher, sold his camp, and he's, as I said, just turned 95 in March. The New York City Board of Ed is not a fan of his because he's still getting a pension, and I have to prove he's alive every year
Ah,
by
how
sending,
interesting.
you have to send a
Wow.
picture with a newspaper date. But his fiscal responsibility sort of translated to me, and I'd say that's how I got into the business and have and there were years of me working for these companies that were very, very difficult, where you want to just throw up your hands and say, I'm done. But failure was never an option. He was a very hard worker, and that translated to me. You just got to persevere and keep going, even though they were really tough times, raising two kids, commuting, getting divorced. I'm not trying to have a sob story here, but you just have this work ethic and you keep going. And luckily the hard work paid off to allow me to be able to make the decision, to be in the driver's seat, to make decisions, to make a change
Yeah.
ultimately.
One of the things that I've heard at the workshops we've been holding, and you were at one of ours, is that for some people, and I was sort of fascinated at that when some of the men couldn't wait to retire. They had lost a place in their company, if I had to interpret it, where they mattered. It was interesting listening to them, and we had conversations afterwards where they were talking about how they had a good job and they made a nice living, but they never saw anyone paying attention to them to improve their situation, change their status, or help them grow. They were sort of together waiting for them to retire. Some of the women in the group, ironically to me, didn't want to retire. They had found status, prestige, recognition, an income, freedom, all kinds of different values. And I know that when you started your coaching and when we do ours, we start with what do you value? And you're talking about hard work. For you, work has meaning, it has purpose, it's positive. And it's not just for the income, I have a hunch. I have a hunch you enjoy what you're doing.
Mhm.
And like the women in the group, it gives you a reason for every day to get up and matter. And I think the folks who work with you are not just clients, they matter. Am I speaking something that gives you something? Because the wisdom you're sharing is that, retirement can be really good or not, but maybe the next chapter isn't called, somebody said to me, do I have to call it retirement? I said, no, it's your next chapter. And that's what you're on is a next chapter as opposed to something that in our society has become the work non-work dichotomy here, right? So some thoughts to share.
Well, I feel very lucky that my job is to help people,
Hmm. It
you
is.
know. And something that not everybody knows about me is my master's degree is in counseling.
Ah,
My MBA is in the 30 plus, 35 plus years of working in the industry. And, you know, you connect to your clients. Not every client is for every advisor. There's not a match, but you connect to people that, their needs are more than just about the markets. It's about really, I sometimes I call it money therapy.
it is.
Um, right. And so that's a big part of helping people, making them feel comfortable that they're okay. And, some are not okay. And you have to, speak reality and make, you know, baby steps to get them to be okay and set up a plan and, you know, just get them to the best financial security that you can. But again, as I said, I'm just fortunate to be able to help people, to be able to be in a field that you're able to leave the corporate world and go to a registered investment advisory structure where you can be independent and work with, I mean, at Legacy Edge, there are now 13 former advisors from our firm. And, I know for everybody's in a different field and career, may not be, that for me, it was a logical move. For others, it may not be, but again, that's why, I'm always saying, never say never, keep an open
Yes.
mind. Um, it's a little bit like online dating. Never, I always say you got to be in it to win it.
Well,
You-
but I often coach our clients that this is a time that allows you to experiment. And you don't know what you don't know. And that for people is really scary. The unknown is worse than being stuck. But now that you've gotten into this thing called a space, call it retirement if you want to, or the next one, I can't tell you how many people sold their business and then 2 years later want to buy a new one,
Mhm.
which is interesting. Or
Mhm.
that they're now finding that it's a time that they haven't planned for particularly well. And as I listen to you, the wisdom that comes from really intentionally planning something and then experimenting with it and beginning to restructure it gives you a unique advantage because you've designed something that's working for you and for the folks who you're caring for because it is a collaboration.
It's funny. In my career, I felt like, I had an entrepreneurial spirit because in a sense, you have a group of
Yes.
clients,
Mhm.
you're responsible for them. If you're working for a company, they have certain goals that you have
Mhm.
to attain, and you sort of have your own little business, but yet I wasn't self-employed.
Mhm.
And I had that entrepreneurial spirit, but there was no way during my career that I felt confident enough that, there are some people who are risk takers.
Yes.
I was not one of those people because I had to have that financial security. I had colleges to pay, grad school, weddings, all like, I had a lot on my plate. It just, although I had that spirit, I was too financially, I needed financial security, let's put it that way. And as I said before, failure was not an option. I needed that blanket over me. And again, lucky enough that I now can explore, not being employed by a large
Yeah.
company.
Well, it's interesting. I was in corporate for 20 years. I was an academic for the first 10 years. Then I was in corporate as an executive helping companies change. And I've been in business now for 24 years. Um,
Hmm.
and I know I don't want to retire because I think I retired 24 years ago.
Hmm.
If this is a stage where you can control time, and I think that time is my fifth thing here because time is out of control when you're working in a corporate environment. You're controlled by others who, plan your calendar and structure it in ways. And I've been able to be to I've gone to 40 countries. Every 90 days, my husband and I traveled. We took time to play golf in Scotland and traveled to South Africa and went on horseback riding safaris. So we blended life, but he was CEO of his company and I was CEO of mine. So in a sense, there's no need to retire because we like what we're doing and work isn't work. If work is so much fun, is it work? I'm not sure. But I do
Hmm.
know that helping others begin to see what they can do and it can be done, but you need to be intentional. A guide helps. I do have one question for you, and it came about because I was at the Hudson Valley Estate Planning. I guess it's a conference 2 weeks ago, and one of the gentlemen who was speaking was talking about estate planning. And there was a thing that came up that I thought was so timely for the retirement thing. And his question was to the estate planners, why do I find that so many well-designed estate plans are never followed through? And I said, oh, that's a retiree question of great substance. Perhaps you have a little perspective to add to that because everybody plans, you're talking about it,
Hmm.
and then they ignore the plan, they forget the plan, it's not a real plan. Your thoughts?
Well, what I see typically happens is people go to the attorney, they write the documents, and those documents may be as simple as a will to as extensive as adding fancy, trusts. You know, there should be powers of attorney, there should be healthcare proxies. And people are so relieved once they sign the documents, pay the bill to the attorney, and they say, great, I have my documents. But the big missing step, and again, a good financial advisor will review those documents and talk to your client, and I offer to talk to the attorney to make sure that the documents are matching your accounts. For example, if you set up a revocable trust and you don't title your assets to be owned by that trust, the trust is not going to be do anything for you. So it's really important that your financial advisor can see the documents, can, again, talk to the attorney, bank accounts that should be retitled. Assets sometimes have to move. Assets in a married couple, sometimes if you each have a revocable trust and you retitle, they have to split the assets. So it's very common. It's very common. And the lawyer's job is really done. They're done when they sign those documents and they'll send a letter to the client, but sometimes it's confusing. Sometimes you have to change the beneficiary designation. So you can't, if you have a retirement account, you can't retitle that to the trust because it's yours. You can't change a 401k or an IRA. It's got to be yours. However, the beneficiary designation may need to be changed to the trust as the beneficiary. Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe the contingent beneficiary. These are things that your advisor really should be working with you on because it's not really the lawyer's job once they send that. Their job is to get the documents done, send the letter, and some of them will be good to follow up, but not always.
Yep. Well, I asked the question because the audience was fascinating in how many different ways you can abandon the plan that they put together for you. And
Yeah, it's a
you
shame.
just eliminated it because most people don't understand that. Talking about this whole stage is unfamiliar. And yet we know that we have to begin to take charge of it, but not quite sure what that means. And we're not even sure what that trust was and what the beneficiary for this one is and what happens when and who takes over your daily financial management if you're no longer capable of doing that. And we're dealing with a friend just now who never planned on it. Nobody can write their checks. And it makes life very complicated when you watch chaos. And so it's a very important time. I want to open this up for questions, but before I do that, I want you to have a moment to, I'll call it my advertorial, talk about the way in which you help people and what people might come to you for. And then we'll open up the floor for the questions from the audience. We've had a great audience, and you're still here. Your thoughts, Karen, about
Sure.
what do you do and how can Legacy Edge be of help?
So, as we've talked about, I'm a financial advisor, and what that means is I do financial planning for people to cover all areas of their financial household, from their basic bank account all the way to complicated and complex, as we mentioned, estate planning. Um, some of the things I'd say I emphasize are making sure that as we at Legacy Edge manage money, it's my job to make sure that my clients' risk with their liquid assets is appropriate for their risk tolerance. What we never want to see happen is, we get a market downturn and people panic and sell. That's the worst thing that we can do. So, when I'm doing financial planning for people, we see how much risk is necessary for them to achieve their goals. So, I spend a lot of time making sure people are comfortable with the percentage they have at risk, which is typically in the equity markets. I also, as we've talked about a little bit, spend a lot of time on incapacity and estate planning. You just mentioned, Andy, about
Hmm.
I've been, I've seen situations where, yes, I've gotten calls from children of parents who do not have power of attorney because they left it to their spouse who is now incapacitated themselves, and they can't, in a time where their parents are failing, they have to now struggle to get documents changed. So I work with people intensely on making sure they have powers of attorney, thinking about things like your child is your power of attorney. Should there be, oh, I'm sorry, your spouse is the power of attorney. Should your children now step in now that you've reached a certain age to help out? And should more than one child be power of attorney because it's a lot of work. As I
Hmm.
mentioned with my parents, my sister and I have to tag team,
Yep.
doing different things. To do it yourself is really hard. And then again, finally, the estate plan. What do you want your legacy to be? And while, now, are you gifting money? Are you gifting it appropriately from the right places that are most, we work a lot on tax efficiency, both from a charitable standpoint as well as just getting you your money. What's the best way
Yep.
to get you your money? So that, that is what we do day in and day out as a fiduciary.
One of the things, and one of the workshops that I did, it was an interesting group, but several of the folks there were young women who were concerned about not knowing how to help their parents move into retirement. And
Mhm.
I went, wow, that's an audience I hadn't even thought about. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, how do I educate my daughters or your daughters? I suspect we've tried hard. So they have an idea about how to help parents, even grandparents, migrate into this next stage wisely, as opposed to catching up afterwards or not even catching up because it becomes really quite chaotic at the moment when it has to be done. But I don't know, do you ever get the children first as they talk?
Absolutely. Well,
Oh, good.
not necessarily first, but but get the children of, well, I always, when I meet somebody for the first time, I always ask about their
Yes.
family, including we go down and up, children and
Yep.
parents. So, and understand, and I work with those children and parents, um, especially when you have your client who is, aging, and I think it's really important to connect to the next generation. Um, Even just to say, I am your parents' financial advisor. Some people don't want to share how much money they have. It's a conversation, we have. I always say everybody's situation is different. It's like
Yep.
people. Nobody has the same face. Maybe you're a twin, but even so, you're a little different.
But that's the
Uh,
truth. I mean, and everyone's values and relationships are all unique. And yet, in some ways, there's a recurring pattern in terms of having to really prepare for this as opposed to ad hoc it or, just
yeah.
because it becomes far more chaotic than it need to. So go ahead. You have a
Now, I
thought.
was just going to say, we do work, I do, and we work with younger people. I actually just have a new client who is younger. She happened to inherit money from one of my clients that passed away, and she's become a client. Younger, has a young daughter, and she has parents. So
Uh-huh.
we can educate her on helping to take care of her parents as she
Yep.
um, luckily she's got siblings also. So again, it's a family affair.
Well, and therapy is the wrong word for it, but it has quite the same because everyone's comes in with different agendas, and they all think they mean well, but it's hard to know for whom they're meaning well, and it's hard to understand what's actually going on. So this is really interesting. So for the audience, I think we have more than enough time. Lots,
Mhm.
perfect. If you raise your hand, I'll unmute you. And you can talk or you can chat or you can tell us any way you'd like. I bet you have questions, and I'm delighted to open up the floor. Just raise your hand and I'll come find you. I see I have Barbara Sutton here and Lori Richard John Drone and all kinds of wonderful folks who I know from a long time. Thank you for coming. Questions? Questions for me? Questions for Karen? No questions at all? None? Hmm. Well, then, if there are no questions, then I'm going to ask Karen for some last thoughts that you'd like to leave the group with.
Sure. I would just say, as I mentioned before, if you are thinking about a new change in your life from your work professional perspective, and maybe struggling with how to go about it, to work with somebody, whether that be an Andy or a Lori, but some type of coach. I think it would give you peace of mind. If it's more of a, can I afford to do this? That's more a Karen or a Legacy Edge advisor, one of, the advisors at my firm. I always say you want to be comfortable, obviously, with who you're working with. And not everybody's, it's like the dating world, not everybody's for everybody, but I take very seriously people's chemistry and making sure that they match appropriately with whoever it is counseling them on their careers or their financial household. So, and you can reach me through the Legacy Edge on LinkedIn. My email is kfiller@legacyedge.com. Happy to talk to anybody who just wants to have a conversation.
Wonderful. For us, I was anxious to let Karen share with you her own journey. And I will tell you, I've done over 60 interviews at this point. 30 of them are in the book Rethink Retirement. And I have a workbook that goes with it. But as I've been doing workshops and master classes, people have asked me to do something more intensive to help them design a little bit like Karen has. And I just noticed some questions came up, so I'm going to go to them in 1 second. But well, I'll go to them now and then I'll come back. So you actually put your questions in here instead of raising your hand. Okay. Michael, Corey, how important is it to have a helpful and dedicated life partner?
I would say that's very helpful.
Uh, I'm glad I saw the questions down there. The interesting part about life partners, I mean, I've been married for 58 years. Karen has had a different trajectory, but I do think that talking to somebody and sharing this journey is not inconsequential. And as you deal with your parents and your sister and so forth, it's a very collaborative effort here. So, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you know, you know, there are a lot of people who don't have life partners for some for with choice and some without. Certainly if you can have a life partner, whether that be a life partner, a domestic partner, a spouse, um, it's joyful and helpful, but not everybody has the choice.
Michael had a follow-up question. What is the one thing in your career transition you would change if you could?
Hmm. Wow. I mean, I'm so pleased with how it's gone. Um, one might say maybe do it a little sooner. But I was very, I'm not a person who there are people out there who are very reactionary, will jump and do things. I'm much more thoughtful, logical, as I said, less, more risk adverse. So I think I did it the way I felt comfortable and what was the right time for me. But maybe I could have done it sooner, but this is
I
where I
will
am
tell
now.
you, Michael, from my perspective, remember I specialized in helping organizations change. Humans hate change. And so transitions are really, life is a transition. You think about it, and your entire life has been one of change from when you're young and you're going off to college and people want to know what you're going to study. You get into business and then you have careers and then you get to this point where you haven't really practiced it. But be kind to yourself. I often, Karen asked company to give her space to begin to plan for an exit strategy. I'm trying to work with companies to understand that all of these boomers are going to be exiting, leaving them with a huge empty space where people won't know what they knew, and the wisdom will go, the client relationships that were built over time will change. Even the clients are changing. And so if I had any wisdom is that the career transition is another transition in a long life of change. And your mind basically would be, the status quo bias. I'd rather stay where I am, of course, but you can't. And now the question is, make it as if you're going into the job for the first time. How do you begin to plan for the transition in a positive way and manage your expectations? And then, Lori, I'm so glad you joined us today. What if I'm financially able to retire at any time, but the staff is not skilled enough to do so? Ah,
What?
now you're
Hmm.
talking about your own business, and I'm pretty sure that's the
Okay,
case.
so it sounds like a transition plan needs to be put into place. Succession plan needs to be put into place, which is something that needs to be explored. I mean, if you are self-employed, mm, it's interesting. I've learned we have a friend who owned a business and was at the point that he wanted to slow down, step down, potentially sell his business. And he did something called a co-op, which is basically selling the business to the employees. Now, it sounds like they're not skilled enough at your business. I'm just throwing out co-ops as, an option, but it may be hiring other people at this juncture to take over the business. Maybe you don't have the right staff and need to find some people, or coaching the current staff. I don't know, probably Andy, maybe you have more experience with that.
Well, no, but that's a very good starting point. I mean, you're none of this is should be a sudden jump. Now, it's possible you get sick and something happens, or somebody buys a company and something happens. But you've been building this business, and I love the fact that your company is called Edge Partnerships, which is, similar to Legacy Edge. But
Mm.
this is a time for beginning the conversations about next steps for them and for you. And if they're not skilled enough, but they want the company to continue, who's going to lead it to the next stage before you can migrate out? And the other part is I found folks, as I did my research, who got sick and had to leave the company in the hands of the subordinates who remarkably did very well. And she said to me, now what do I do? Because I don't need me. I was steering and I was controlling, but I found that they did really well when I wasn't there. I said, that's something to be excited about. Where do you go next is now a different story for you. So it's a time for you to experiment, see what might happen. And then we have one more. What if you're single and how does that affect your next phase of life? How can you plan for that?
Well, I would say, and we had this a little bit in the workshop, Andy, that I
That's right.
attended with you. Some people asked that question, and I think thinking about your interest, if you're not going to work any longer, perhaps thinking about what your interests are and getting involved in that prior to leaving your work, because once you leave work, yes, you may not have a schedule. Again, do you have passions about, I don't know, what it could be, cooking, animals, whatever it might be, and wine, I don't know, getting involved, whether volunteering, serving on boards. We're lucky enough to have this local JCC nearby where there's activities going on all the time. It's a place to go and meet people. If you're a social person, yes, you definitely want to set things up. And people play mahjong, canasta. I haven't gotten into that quite yet. I like to keep moving, not sitting. So yeah, you really do want to think about that, how you're going to spend your time and think about passions and hobbies and things maybe you haven't had time for that you can now get involved with.
There's one question here that I'm going to suggest you talk to Karen about separately because a short answer is not easy. The question is, please explain more about the revocable trust. And
Titling the revocable
yeah,
trust. I
right.
could say just quickly, I can say if you have assets, let's say a brokerage account, and it's in your name or even in the name jointly with your spouse. If you have a revocable trust, everybody's situation is different and you have to talk to the lawyer, but typically that account, that brokerage account will be retitled and owned by the trust so that when uh, if anything happens to you during life and you're incapacitated, it'll explain who would take over. It avoids probate ultimately. Um, but I do know who that is and I can talk more extensively with that person.
Ah, good. I thought you might. But I don't think, knowing what I know about it, it's not a simple answer. And you really need to take a look at who you are, what you're doing before you understand
Yes.
from the abstract to the reality. What do I do? Because it's important. We have
Mhm.
another question here. Yeah, you can see it also, I guess. What's the
Yeah.
best way to know if you're ready for a transition or exit strategy from a financial perspective? What would you say are the most important things to consider from a financial perspective? What a great questions. Please.
So, you know, it's knowing that, I mean, depending on who you are and your willingness to take risk, if for me and many of my clients, you want to know that if you stop earning money from a company, whether you're self-employed, you stop working, you then become that company. You are then paying yourself. And how is that going to happen? So knowing your budget, they always say a good solid year before you exit and will have no income to take a very close look at your budget, know what you need coming in, a net amount. What do I need? Just like you're paying yourself, just like your employer paid you. What's coming in? How much do you need? And where is it going to come from? And then have that stress tested with different market scenarios for a long time. Like we plan till people are 95 years old because people are living that long. My father as evidence. So you want to have work with somebody to stress test the situation, think about things that can happen. Sometimes people do their budget and having done it for so many years, say, yeah, but what about? What about if you're really spending enough on travel? What if the boiler breaks? What if? That's my job. My job is to think about what can go wrong with this situation, not to be a downer, but to be a risk manager and to give you confidence that you'll be okay.
Ah, the confidence that you'll be okay. But this is a great time to begin to build new skills around this. And your question is a wonderful one, because, and I think that my refusal to retire means that you don't have to stop what you're doing to get the kind of things you'd like to have in a retirement times. And so it becomes important. It is a really interesting opportunity. There are two more from Lori. I'm knee deep in succession planning. I know you are. And thank you, Karen, for sharing your wisdom in a real and relatable way. Andy, I appreciate you and for the invitation and convening us in this important conversation. Lori, let me give you my follow-up, and I'll do my little advertorial here because one of the things that has come about doing this work is a request for more intensive work on this. So we've launched a program July 21st and 22nd, 2 half days from 11 to 5. I've already done this several times, and I find that a full day is too much and a half a day is too little, so it gives us enough time. And what we do is really get into an in-depth, a little bit like what Karen did with Lori, but different, about how do I plan and design the next stage of my life with exercises, conversations, material. And I'm offering this. We're going to be doing it July 21st and 22nd. You can find it on our website, andysimon.com. I'm looking for early registration. For the first 10 people, I'll send you a signed copy of the book, and we'll also get a bonus of a 30-minute session just one-on-one. I'm limiting it to 20 people. It's more than enough. And what we like to do is help you go through, and I'm going back and forth between 4 pillars and 5. Who am I? How do I structure my day? What's my purpose and meaning? How do I build my community? And I love this thing about time because I'm becoming really sensitive to the fact that unless you begin to understand time, it's like money. How will I spend it best? And if you're going to keep waiting to the question about when, that's fine. But then you're going to find yourself in an interesting place where I spent all this time waiting. And if you go fast and early, like one story in there of a guy who retired at 58, only to find that he was bored to death and he had 30 years to go. And now he's now 80 and he said, oh, the lesson learned is don't wait to start to do what you'd like. So I'd be delighted to talk to you about the program, tell you about what we'll be doing, and help you decide whether this would be a good time for you to help design the next stage in your life. My books are available on Amazon. You can see them behind me. My job is to help you do better in whatever it is that's in your name, your stage. Thank you for joining us today. Karen, thank you so much for being here. What a great opportunity to share your thoughts. Last thought, man. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure and I appreciate it.
My pleasure. All right, everyone. Take care now and have a great day. It's been fun. Bye now.